Hello and welcome to the FA's Football and Me series, Season 3. I'm Alex Bayliss.
And I'm Lim Loftus.
And today we're at the iconic Wembley Stadium discussing all things LGBTQ+ inclusion in football.
Throughout this season, you'll see some fantastic examples of equality, diversity and inclusion. And through deep conversation, we'll meet many football faces, from coaches to players to volunteers and many more, as we look to discuss some of football's hottest topics. So, without further ado, Flo, Jahmal, Natalie and Liz, thank you very much for joining us.
We'll kick it off with you, Jahmal. You're a semi-professional footballer, former professional footballer. Can you tell us what your football journey's been like?
It's been incredible. It's really hard to put into words, even having the opportunity to be here today in such an established group. So I started off at Crystal Palace in their academy, and I played there from the ages of 9 until 18. And I didn't end up getting a professional contract. After my scholarship, I was released, and I thought my world was going to fall apart, to be completely honest with you. Being in the footballing environment and playing around my friends, playing around professional coaches for so long, having the opportunity to travel all around the country, being able to compete, going around the world, it was incredible, you know. So going into Hearts and being a professional there, that was when I thought, oh, I'm starting to get somewhere now. I'm really starting to get somewhere, living away from home, being around people that I probably wouldn't have met otherwise, and having the opportunity to see a different part of the UK that I hadn't actually been to before that point. So naturally, I thought, how can I make the most out of this opportunity? And I started to explore. I started to make some really good friends, some that I'm still in contact with now. And unfortunately, I didn't feel as though I was still comfortable or ready enough to make my presence known, or to make my identity known at least. So I didn't necessarily make the most of the opportunity being at Hearts at the time. And it's something that I kick myself about, to be honest, every single day. And I'm very proud of the journey of not just coming through Crystal Palace's academy, but also, like I say, going to Hearts and then being in non-league football for 8 years or so now. When I look back on everything that's happened over the last 3 years especially, I think I probably could have and should have done this sooner, you know, because I've been fortunate enough to meet so many incredible people, and so many people that do want me to be myself, but also want so many others to be themselves in whatever capacity that might be. So yeah, I can't even thank enough people for everything that they've done along the way for me. But being able to step into a change room environment and being able to step into a club where everything is in place for you to just arrive and for you to perform. I think that's something that I've been seeking, and something that I didn't necessarily have the confidence to ask for, essentially. And at the end of the day, I have to take accountability for the fact that I waited so long, but also I also have to understand that it's my journey, as it is all of our journeys, you know, to speak about the real deep, intimate parts of ourselves. And I'm very thankful that through playing football, I'm able to be here today.
Liz, you worked at Stonewall and more recently the FA. How is the football landscape changing to be more inclusive?
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually I think Jahmal just summed it up beautifully, which is that football has to be ready to allow people to open up and actually let people into their identity, right? I think about the ways football has changed in the last 5-10 years. We now have, you know, real investment from clubs into wanting to ensure that their environments are inclusive, whether that's training their staff, training their coaches, training their players on what LGBT inclusion means. We're seeing, you know, campaigns like Rainbow Laces be wonderful every single year, and that's a great example of a gesture that can just let people know in a stadium that they're included, that they're part of football, that they're welcome here. Football versus homophobia as well every year in February time also gives people a chance to really learn about what LGBT inclusion is and why it belongs in football. But I think ultimately, we've seen a real shift from it being something that football should do to being something that football has to do. And so you're getting actual business decisions being predicated on equity, diversity and inclusion, whether that is LGBT inclusion, whether that is anti-racism, whether that is any aspect really of making sure that football can be everyone's game. And I always think what's so beautiful about football is that it's kind of ready-made for inclusion. Like, you might not think that sometimes because of all the terrible sides of it often, but when you're in a stadium and you're at beautiful Wembley today and your team are on for a goal and they're running down the line and you're with all your fans and everyone's standing up together, right? It doesn't matter where you're from, what your background is, what you had for breakfast that morning, right? You're all just buzzing for your team to score. And the fact that football can ignite that in people, for me, it just means that it is a sport that is perfect for equity and diversity and inclusion to be part of it. And I think the shift that we've seen of it being taken seriously now by clubs, by the FA, by the Premier League, means that, yeah, players like Jahmal can come out and be their true selves, and fans like myself can be in the stadium and feel really wanted and loved and respected for the game that I also love as well.
You mentioned some of those really fantastic campaigns like Stonewall's Rainbow Laces and Football versus Homophobia. And Natalie, you're very active with Football versus Transphobia, aren't you? Can you tell us a bit more about their aims and initiatives and all the good things that they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Football versus Transphobia is really about making football a safe place and an inclusive place for trans people to exist and to thrive. And of course also, football sits at this unique kind of cultural place in our society, in our communities. And it's an opportunity for us to really educate the wider world about the fact that, you know, trans people are here, we're not going anywhere, right? And we've got just as much right to exist in this society as everyone else. But of course, when we talk about trans people in football, people think about playing a lot, and there's a lot of conversation around that. But actually, trans people are showing up everywhere, right? We're supporting our teams, you know, we're refereeing, we're coaching, we're in the media, we're all over the game. Football needs to be safe and needs to be welcoming for those people. So first and foremost, it's about awareness, anti-discrimination around trans participation in football, whatever it is. But also, like, something I'm very passionate about is the football club that I play for, right? It's a community football club. So many people, they move to the area, and one of the first things they do is they go on the club Facebook account or whatever, and they say, hey, you know, my child is 12 years old or whatever, is looking for a team. Have you got some space there? And that's that unique place that football has. It's that connection to community, that connection to society that we're all entitled to, right? We all need to have in order to thrive. And we've got to make sure that trans people are just as able to access that as everyone else. So that's really what we're trying to do. Lots of campaigns, through helping clubs to make sure that, you know, their facilities are welcoming for trans people, helping people to understand, like, what does transphobia look like? What does transphobic discrimination look like? That kind of thing, so that people can combat that. But yeah, absolutely loads going on.
Flo, you're a broadcaster, so you're amongst other things, on the other end of the interview today. Could you talk about how your career in football has developed?
Yeah, so you kind of hinted at there, but I've sort of done everything that you can in the football media landscape. So started out as a writer, covering a lot of media rights, sponsorship, wider sports business issues. So that was when I first started being involved in the media side of sport, and then started doing more broadcasts, did radio and TV and covering the game that way, worked in production. So I've kind of seen there and done it all, and seen the progress of not just inclusion, but obviously the women's game, which has had its own role to play in that. So yeah, it's been a really long journey over the course, like, the last 10 years for me, to see how the media landscape has changed and how it in itself is trying to make itself more inclusive as well.
So we've talked a lot about how important it is to be included and to be your true self, both on and off the pitch. And I think we've all got examples of where, well, we all know that you don't just come out once, you have to come out again and again and again in all different situations. And sometimes there are situations where you think, I don't quite feel comfortable around this person, I'm not ready to get into it. And you find that you're not being, like, honest. You can't give all your energy to something because you're kind of hiding something, you're careful about what you say. And I wanted to ask you, Jahmal, how, reflecting that on the pitch, and maybe off the pitch as well, but into football, how do you find that your football experience has enhanced since you did come out?
Massively. From the person that I was before I did come out to the person that I am now, it's literally night and day. And I feel like I'm in a period of my life at the moment where I've started to let go of a lot. I've started to let go of the negative thoughts that I have about myself first and foremost, because that is displayed in how I interact with others. So whether that be in a footballing sense or a professional sense or in a personal sense. And looking back at when I was younger, what I used to do is I used to be super aggressive, and I used to be quite nasty to people, because as a black man, especially growing up in South East London, there wasn't anybody that I could be like, you know. So it was very difficult to know that I'm in a position that not many people are, and potentially not many other people will be. If I'd have done this when I was a lot younger, I don't exactly know how my career would have gone, but I'm on my own journey, and I'm at a point now where I'm able to let go of a lot of the negative thoughts that I did have about my identity. And knowing that there's people out there, and have been people out there, and will continue to be people out there that are fully in support of myself and my identity, has given me the confidence to be able to go and speak on behalf of others as well, which I think is super important, because at the end of the day, we're not going to know how many LGBTQ plus people that we're going to be that are not going to be participating in the sport, whether that's in a playing capacity or a management capacity or as a supporter, whatever it might be. Being able to say that there are so many other people that are willing for our community to be a part of the club is incredible.
Liz, Stonewall data said over half LGBTQ plus communities have never attended an event or space specifically for LGBTQ plus people. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's a statistic that always really blows my mind, because you imagine, that, if you come out as LGBTQ plus, that you can just go to your local town and find a space for you and find your community, when in reality, LGBTQ plus people live in every part of the UK. And in reality, most of these venues and events happen in London and Manchester and Leeds, like our big major cities, right? And so communities that live in more rural spaces, that live in smaller towns, little towns like I grew up in the northwest of England, there isn't that ready-made venue there for you or that ready-made event there for you at all. So this idea that LGBTQ plus people can just kind of stay over there and be in their own space and their own places doesn't really wash when you think about most of the country doesn't even have that infrastructure there, right? And again, that's why I think football's really wonderful, because you also have a football club in every single corner of the country, right? In those rural places, you'll have like a non-league team that you can support, or a local team that is kind of moving their way up the hierarchy. Like, you have this opportunity to find community, like what you were saying, right? Like that 12-year-old that's getting their mum to message you on Facebook to say, can we join your club? Like, there is a community there. And so I think, again, why football and inclusion go hand in hand sometimes is that football can be that inclusive community. And that's not to say that your local team has to be suddenly bedecked in rainbows for the whole of the year. Like, that's not what we're saying. But when there is someone who is from the LGBT community that wants to join a team or join a club or be part of something, that they'll be welcome there, because we really don't have the spaces. We don't have the luxury of having an LGBT-focused football team in every single town or village or even city in the UK. So again, I just think football's really ready-made to be welcoming to the community. And LGBTQ plus people like playing football, we're ballers.
Yeah, so we talk about how important it is to have that visibility. And Natalie, how important is it to have trans role models both in football and in the wider society?
So when I was growing up, I didn't see any trans people in football. I didn't really see any trans people, to be quite honest. If I did, it was, some slightly dubious portrayal in media that I didn't really kind of see a lot of myself in, Usually someone, that had been into some horrific situation, right? And it was didn't help you kind of understand your place in the world. So it's super important. And I think it's very, very difficult because there aren't tons of trans people, right? We are a minority within a minority, as in LGBTQ plus people more generally. And a lot of trans people, even now, feel they've kind of got to hide. Historically, as a community, we've been encouraged to kind of, if you go back far enough, people who transitioned were encouraged to kind of move to a different town, break contact with everyone they knew, right? And that's not conducive to good mental health, and that's not conducive to a visible position in society. Thankfully, that doesn't happen quite so much anymore at all, but still very much a situation where people feel that they've got to kind of hide. And I think that's why it's important that people can see trans people being open and getting on with their lives and succeeding in whatever it is that they want to do in society. And football is, of course, no exception. I see lots of young sort of LGBTQ people more generally, but particularly trans people who drift away from sport, drift away from football when they come out. And some of that is because they don't feel they're going to be welcome. They feel they're going to experience discrimination. Some of that is because they see hard barriers sometimes, often, for example, for a young trans boy coming out, right? He might have to go and play for a different football team. And that's quite a barrier for some people. And that's quite a challenge. And sometimes that means, difficulties in getting to a different place, that kind of thing, right? All these structural issues. It's really important that people can see people succeeding. Really important that they can see people succeeding that they can relate to, that's why we've got to have all different kinds of trans people being visible in football particularly, because it is in that unique place in society where people will see a footballer, they might not, they might not see someone on the stage in theatre, they might not see someone in television media, but they might go and see their local team, they might go and see someone playing for the same football team as them and think, there's someone else like me, and that's really, really powerful.
Flo, what do you think has been like the most significant change for LGBTQ plus inclusion in the game?
I think it's easy to probably look at some of the most high profile examples. I kind of Natalie touched on it there with probably the really visible people like players, especially in the men's game, who've come out recently, and that's been amazing, especially having players in the EFL, obviously players internationally, former pros coming out after retirement. That is huge, and even though there's still a handful of individuals, which is obviously frustrating, and we're still yet to see it at the sort of highest level, it is really powerful, it is really important, and I think it just normalises things for everyone, and it has those high profile visibility. It makes people feel like there is someone representing who they are and someone like them. I think that's been hugely important for the men's game, and I think it has a knock-on effect on men's fans as well, or everyone included in the men's game. And then I think with the women's game, there's a slightly different scenario because it has always set an example as being much more inclusive, historically and traditionally, than the men's game. It's not a perfect scenario. There's still a lot of progress that needs to be made in making sure that all players feel comfortable to be publicly out. But I do think it's a really great example of how you can try and create a really inclusive game. And the women's game has also just changed dramatically over a really short space of time. So I think that's why the progress feels really rapid, because those players are playing at the highest level, they're on the national team and they are out. And I think that is really huge, whereas we are yet to really see that breakthrough on the men's game. But I do think the combination of those two things and the impact they've had on the wider football community in England has been massive. And also, even when you look at London Pride, for example, the number of football clubs that march in that, the number of football adjacent organisations that march in that, that's a whole sort of sub-party in itself, whereas maybe 5-10 years ago it was a handful of clubs getting involved. Most clubs in the whole entire pyramid now have an LGBTQ fan group, some, bigger and more active than others, but obviously if you look at a club like Arsenal, their group is huge. You have to ballot to try and get on the bus for London Pride. It's massive. So I think people are making progress at their own pace. Some clubs have an LGBTQ fan group of one person, but it's still one person who's making that change in their community, and that's what matters.
Liz, you've battled homophobia in football for a number of years. How important is it that we keep on top of it and manage what people will probably say is banter? How big is that?
Yeah, it's huge, and I'll start by saying two things. I'm Northern and a Manchester United fan, so I'm used to banter, right? That is a prerequisite for every day in my life, to be honest with you. And it isn't about banter itself, having jokes and having a laugh with people being terrible or being something that we shouldn't do. But it's recognising that when that banter begins to bring into question someone's identity or someone's reason for existence or just who they are as a person, that's a line that has been crossed. And, I kind of speak about this across lots of different sports, actually, and lots of different areas of different sports. So players, coaches, sport workforce. And I describe it in this way, which is that banter and jokes around people's identity form a basis for stereotypes to then be built upon, for insults to then be built upon, for, sometimes violent acts to be built upon. It provides this basis of harm, really, and it's like a harm triangle. And so if you have the ability to take a few bricks out of that triangle, I'll mix my metaphors here now, but if you have the ability to destabilize the base of that by not having harmful banter, by not having jokes based on people's identity, by not subscribing to stereotypes about people, then we can create a society that is less able to tolerate hate, which I think is what we want, right? We want a society that is more kind and more loving and more accepting, and I think everyone benefits with that. And that's the other thing, which is that, to have banter, to make fun out of people, to be laughing at people's expense, that's not nice for anyone. That's not nice for matey boy down the pub with his boys. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not nice for anyone to experience that. It's not just LGBT people or people of colour or whoever that should be able to be respected and live with dignity. Like, everyone really benefits from that. But yeah, I think one of the pieces that always comes up for me is like, oh, you want to stop having jokes and stop having banter? I was like, no, I'd like Manchester United to do better, actually, and then we won't have to have any banter. But no, it isn't about taking people's ability to have a laugh and a joke away. That's so important. It's just about when you direct that at someone's identity, that's when it's wrong. And I guess for all of us, that's the impact that we can have. And that's quite scary, actually, interrupting some of that and calling people in or having a chat with your mate or taking them to one side. That takes a lot of courage for people to do that. So I always respect people when they're able to look at the people around them and reduce the ability for banter and jokes that are harmful to exist within society.
Natalie, just coming back to you, how do you feel that football has evolved and continues to evolve to make sure that trans people are able to fully participate?
I think what's kind of important here is that creating this place for trans people to exist in football is almost, for me certainly, it's a escape sometimes from that negativity in society, right? We get on that pitch, we get onto the training field or whatever, and you can forget sometimes that somebody shouted something derogatory at you on the way there. You can forget that someone made a joke about you in Parliament, you know, that kind of thing. You can get some distance from some of that, and you can just do something you're enjoying, and that I think is really, really important. There's nuances, particularly in the kind of the grassroots delivery of football, if you like, which I think are really exciting, where you see, particularly, and Liz talked about this earlier, where you've got these more sort of queer spaces in cities and in large population centres, right? And naturally it's going to happen there first. But I think what we're seeing there is sometimes sort of LGBTQ specific leagues, like safer spaces for LGBTQ people to get into football, sometimes for the first time, sometimes to get back into football after some years out. And what that's doing is creating a pathway for people to get back to playing or get into playing. That's really exciting, because then quite often what we see is then those people going into the more mainstream game, growing the numbers of people that are getting something out of football, which is super important. But also, like, there's a real crossover at that level with sort of trans and queer people in their community playing football, and sort of the trans and queer community more widely, which is meaning that kind of football is infiltrating those spaces as well, and people are saying, oh yeah, actually, yeah, this sport has got something for me, there's something I can get out of that. So there's this real crossover, particularly in sort of the women's game and the more inclusive game for women and non-binary people. There's lots going on there, which is really exciting, and it's a real kind of, I think, a cultural moment for football, where we're seeing, wow, there's this whole new side of the sport, whole new side of kind of the culture around it, which is really interesting. And that's kind of really taken off in the last 5-6 years.
Flo, what do you think football's job is in tackling homophobia and wider discrimination?
Well, I do think Natalie's got a huge point there, because the power of football is huge, and obviously all of us sitting here really believe in that because we're part of this conversation. And I think it can be hard when you work in a game that you love so much, because the lines sometimes become blurred about your professional and personal responsibility, and when your identity becomes wrapped up in that as well. So it can be a great burden, and I'm sure that a lot of these guys maybe feel that too in the work that they do, because it is your everything all the time, and you want it to work so much, you want to see the positive change. And I do think it's about highlighting those moments in order to continue to drive you. But I completely agree with Natalie in that I think the power of football is huge, and I think football could be doing a lot more when it comes to those intersections with what's going on in society. I think some clubs and some organisations and some leagues have realised that and really tried to do that, whether it's LGBTQ inclusion or other societal issues or causes. I think we've seen that a lot since the pandemic, I think, where people sort of felt like football clubs, they really realise that they're such a big part of their communities, even more so than ever, whereas, you know, maybe in the time they'd sort of forgotten that, but it was a moment that brought everyone together, I think. So I think we're seeing that change, but even though it seems cliche and cheesy to say, I do think that football as a tool for societal change is absolutely huge. The potential is massive. It's just whether certain individuals, certain clubs, certain stakeholders want to flip that switch and say, we want to publicly and proudly and explicitly be a part of that change, or there's understandably a bit of a, you know, a apprehension. People are scared. They don't want to necessarily, you know, raise their voice about certain things. But I think everyone here on this panel is a shining example of when you do, try and lead by example, you can make huge, long-lasting impact. It just does sometimes take a bit of time.
Right, this one is for all of you, so please just weigh in as you see fit. 5 years' time, how do we want the football landscape and LGBTQ+ inclusion and visibility to look?
So I think there's some genuine key metrics that you could utilise here. So like number of players who feel able to share their coming out story. Like that could be something that I hope we see more of in the next 5 years. Number of incidents at games relating to homophobia reduced. That could be like a key metric that you follow over 5 years. But I guess ultimately I think we're in a point in 2024 where, it's 11 years since Rainbow Laces started, since Gay Gooners started, since gay marriage legislation even was passed in the UK. It's been 10 years of like pretty good times for being LGBTQ+ in the UK anyway, right? Of this like real culture shift and change within the country. And as we've come to the end of that 10 years, I think there's begun to be a bit of a pushback to that people are suddenly thinking like, actually, like what's going on here? Why am I seeing rainbows everywhere? And there's been a bit of a detachment of understanding why it's important and why it's part of society. I hope in the next 5 years, we've started to build some of that back again and really build some of that understanding, not necessarily with the LGBT community actually, but with like wider society of why it's important to have trans-inclusive spaces, why it's important to have things like rainbow laces or rainbow lanyards or whatever it might be, and why that representation is important. And that's a bit harder to track because that's about hearts and minds, right? And that's way harder to track over 5 years. But also, yeah, more gay players, I guess, would be great.
Just the probably experience of people going to games. I know, Liz mentioned specific like incident reporting and things like that. I do think there has been a wider cultural shift in not just the way that football exists in our society, but also the behaviour of fans. I do think there has been progress and a shift. The way that people behave on social media, even though social media can be a really toxic place, I do think there's some positive, almost like self-policing and positive experience there, and culture, a new culture being built that is including the existing culture, because English football culture is so unique and there's so much of it that is incredible and that we all love, and it's what makes it special. But I think what's great is that people are starting to build on that and they're making that culture more inclusive. So I think seeing that change continue and seeing general fan experiences and staff or player, coaches, media experiences become much more positive and much more kind of inclusive, I think would be massive. Harder to quantify than Liz's great stats, but I do think that overall energy, like we are really starting to see it. It's just, at the moment, maybe we only get snippets of it, and if we could see that all year long, that would be the absolute dream.
What I would love to see is some real strong leadership, and that's when I say leadership, it's we can all take a leading role in this, right? We can all lead in our own way, whether it be in our local club, in our homes, right, on a national scale. Strong, confident leadership around this is what I want football to be. I want football to be for everyone. I want everyone to have a place in football that they feel safe and confident. And actually, we're going to stand up for people who are being marginalised, whether that be in football, whether that be in society more widely. It's a real strong, confident leadership to say, this is what I want it to be. If you're not aligned with that, you're not on the journey with us. You need to get on the journey, or you need to kind of you need to go and find something else to do. But that real strength of message, that real strength and clarity of thought and of strategy to say, we're going to make football this inclusive place. We're going to be a bit brave, because we have to be brave sometimes. We have to challenge some narratives. We have to challenge some negativity. But we're going to face into that, and we're going to take that leadership. And we can do that from anywhere in society, but particularly people who have got a platform, who've got power to be brave and to say, I'm standing up for what's right here, and I'm going to combat some difficulties in doing so.
For me, from a practical sense, being someone that is in the dressing room week in, week out, I know what the players speak about, I know what the players think like, and I know how the players go about their business essentially on the pitch. But what I will say is that there's a lot of opportunity for things such as sexism and misogyny to be addressed and directly addressed, because I've been in change rooms in the past where you get some quite horrific comments, And a lot of the time people don't understand that the comments that they are making are offensive for various different reasons. So speaking to players first and foremost, and then of course, when they're able to spread the message that actually they are allies or they are advocates of the LGBTQ+ community, naturally you'd like to think that everyone else that's around the club, so supporters, volunteers, are thinking, okay, well, if they're able to make a change and essentially we're coming to watch and support them, then maybe that will start to change the way that we view things, and maybe that will start to change the way that interactions are had between the wider society and the LGBTQ+ community. So I do certainly think that there is a massive opportunity for positive change to be made, but it has to be a collective effort. You know, I'm so supportive of Rainbow Laces campaign and Football v Homophobia's month of action in February. And as much as they are both amazing times of the year, a lot of people leading up to that point in the year will think, well, actually, I have all of this rainbow branded gear, whatever it might be, and then it's around for a month and then it goes away until the next year or until the next activation point. Whereas along the way, it can't just be a case of, cool, we're gonna drop something in the water and then everyone's gonna get it and everyone's gonna remember, and then that continues. It has to be a slow and steady introducing people to different themes, whatever it may be, and at least that gives people the opportunity all year long to be able to actually have that education and have that understanding. And then naturally those conversations will then go home, they'll go to school, they'll go to, I don't know, Spain, for example. Do you see what I mean? Because we live in a day and age at the moment where we're very fortunate to have social media, and we're very fortunate to be able to connect in an instant with someone halfway across the world. So hopefully by the time that this comes out, we would have all, which I'm sure we will continue to be doing amazing work leading up to Rainbow Laces in particular, which will be activating soon. And we'd like to think that there will be positive change that everyone can be a part of, you know, not just us that are here in this room today, but everyone.
Football wants us to be our authentic selves. What advice would you give to people from the LGBTQ+ community who perhaps haven't got to the point yet where they feel like they can be themselves?
I think take every day as it comes, and also appreciate how far you've come on your own individual journey, because for me, it's taken me 3 years to feel comfortable enough to sit in a room such as this and be able to speak about what we've been speaking about today. I can't speak for everybody that their journey is going to take 3 years, or when they get 3 years into their journey, they're going to start to feel more comfortable, feel safe, feel secure. I can't say that. This is just how it's been for me. But what I can say is that when you start to find your tribe, when you start to find like-minded people, people that are similar to yourself, you start to realize that actually you're not alone. And there are so many different avenues and so many different ways to connect and find people that are similar to yourself. So when you do feel confident enough to actually come out, whether that be publicly or whether you start speaking within your family, your friendship circles, for example, take that in your stride, because that's a win. Every conversation is a win. Every positive thought that you have about your identity is a win. And I certainly haven't given myself the opportunity to say, actually, do you know what, mate? You've done all right. Like, literally, like, you've done all right. I never thought that this would be the case when I was a lot younger, especially. But yeah, like I say, every time you have a positive thought about who you are and who you feel like you're becoming, celebrate it. Because at the end of the day, there's going to be so many people, not just in England, but all over the world, that actually don't have that person or those people to be able to speak to about whether it's how they're feeling or a conversation they do want to have, or potentially being brave and going out into the world for themselves and finding who their people are, you know. So yeah, take every day as it comes. And again, some days are going to be smooth sailing. Other days you might feel like you're at rock bottom, but so long as you celebrate your existence, then hopefully over time you'll be celebrated as well.
You said it a little bit earlier about being able to be vulnerable, and that I think is probably the biggest thing that I've got out of telling people who I am, is a bit more space to say, actually, you know, like I'm not doing so well today or whatever, but I don't have to have my big kind of coat on and hide from everything. It's like I can be a little bit more vulnerable. I can be sad, I can be happy, right? The highs and the lows are more there, and you feel able to kind of connect a little bit more with people. And I think also people appreciate it. People will understand you better. People will be able to connect with you more because you're more yourself, you're more genuine. You're not thinking so much about who am I supposed to be. you're being natural and you're thinking, who actually am I? What do I actually feel about this? And that can't be understated as to how powerful and valuable that is in terms of making personal connections. So it's absolutely worth it. There's the saying, isn't there, that, you know, like the best time was whenever, the next best time is now. So I think if there's a step that people can take now, safely, do it. Well worth it.
I feel like that was the perfect way. Be vulnerable, everyone's journey is different, celebrate yourselves. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this chat. It's been unbelievable. And for everyone at home, thank you for watching, thank you for listening. Make sure you keep your eyes peeled for more episodes of Football and Me.